and welcome back to Kiss and Tell. I'm Dr. Jenny, and we're here again with Ava. You might remember her from our last podcast that we did several years ago, actually. Hi, Ava, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
So, talk to us about what's going on. What is going on in your professional life that you realized you want to kiss and tell about today?
Things have grown and expanded as, as our passions and businesses do.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm primarily focused on working with women in long-term relationships or women who desire to be in long-term relationships. I also work with couples and men, but, my work has really especially this last year, has been helping women to really touch themselves in a new way, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so I'm extremely passionate to share some of that today, and in a new context and maybe people haven't heard before.
Okay, so introduce everybody to you again. Just remind them what you do and your background.
So I often say that I take women to the places that their husbands can't and their therapist won't. And the reason why I say that is because, not because our husbands or boyfriends or partners can't give us pleasure or can't fulfill our needs, or not because we can't heal those things in therapy, but because I truly believe that when a woman is touching her own body in a way that is just her, nothing outside of herself, that there is no power, no embodiment, no healing that is greater than that. And so, over the past year, especially, I've been able to witness the women in my world as clients, really come into themselves as I'm guiding these experiences with them. And then we get to come back if they're in like a group experience with me and share what that was like. And so I have found that the women in these spaces have been transforming faster, having huge breakthroughs. I just had a woman the other day tell me um, that she has done somatic work for 6 years, and only now has she really felt that she is in her body. I had another woman in one of these sessions where we were doing some vaginal mapping. I was guiding vaginal mapping on my silicone model as the group was having their own experience. And
Mhm.
she came back and she had tears in her eyes, and she's like, I never knew I could touch myself sexually or experience sexual touch without pain.
Mhm.
And so it's these components that I'm seeing when women are working with their physical tissue, their physical body, not just in a sexual sense, but
Mhm.
deeply embodied in a somatic sense where they are being led and guided through their senses. That is where the true healing is really residing. And the work that I have been doing, especially again over the past year, has been truly rooted in that. It's cutting past all of the just the intellectual stuff or the skill sets and really applying it hands-on in real time to have these experiences.
So define for people what somatic is.
So somatic meaning just in the body or
Okay.
feeling with the five senses. And
Mhm.
so that's a pretty, the word somatic in general, we can build upon that, right? And so even concepts inside of the sexuality space, like I'd like to speak to sexual magic today, it involves somatics, it involves being in the body, staying in the body. And
Mhm.
so, what I'm finding is that for a lot of women, but also men, anyone kind of in this healing process, not only are we normally avoiding sexuality because a lot of people don't really think about it unless they have gone through some sort of sexual trauma,
Yeah.
um, they're not really in their bodies. And so, what I'm finding is that the very root of staying in the body and being in the body without having to constantly self-regulate um, is the root, right? Is going back to the balancing of our sexuality, the connection that we have um, in our genitals. And so I'm really finding that a big part of really staying in the body and having those somatic experiences, meaning we're able to move with the transmissions that are coming through. So the resistance, the tension, the emotions such as grief, the beliefs that come up as a result of that, we're able to work with it in real time and actually use sexual energy as workable energy, as healing energy to move through these things that are stored there. And so when I say somatic, I'm meaning we're actually using sexual energy as healing energy in real time, not something that is so elusive or, again, I've witnessed this occurring in women in 1 hour sessions, 2 hour sessions.
So is it easy for them or do they find it difficult?
So it's not easy. I think that when we talk about using pleasure as healing or pleasure as medicine, we automatically think it's like this ecstasy, this ecstatic experience.
Mhm.
But what I have found is that when we're utilizing our sexual energy as healing energy, it's about being able to hold the discomfort. It's about being able to find the ecstasy, the bliss, the joy, the pleasure within the uncomfortable moments. So when we want to run away, when we want to stop or freeze, which is this response of the nervous system, depending on the person
Mhm.
through pleasure, through the stimulation of our sexual energy on a physical, talking on a physical level, we quite literally are able to work with what is arising. And so the human body can hold these things simultaneously. We can hold the fact that we're moving through this resistance or grief or emotion that is arising, but also experience pleasure and joy and satisfaction at the same time. And I would go on to say that when we're able to stay in that discomfort, it adds to the satisfaction. It tells the mind, it's like, okay, I'm actually safe here. I can relax into this. Like I didn't die,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know?
So, what was your journey to get to this type of therapy? Like, how did you pick somatic?
So yeah, my process, I work with three main pieces in my work. And
Okay.
so one of those being the somatic level, another being subconscious. And so I'm also working with the beliefs around intimacy, the beliefs that we hold around love. You know, a lot of women especially have beliefs that their needs will never be met inside of a relationship. And so it's really hard for us to approach sex and intimacy and pleasure when she's still holding on to the belief that no matter what she does, her needs are not going to be met, right? And so
Right.
that's the resistance that I'm speaking of. We cannot hold these conflicting beliefs within our reality. We cannot hold the belief that I want deep love and lasting intimacy while simultaneously holding on to the belief that our needs will never be met and that this type of love and intimacy is not available to us, right? So, this is what causes so much conflict in us, especially around our inability to make decisions, find clarity, find peace. It creates so much havoc within our emotional system. We can feel like we're riding a roller coaster. It's like constantly up and down, especially with the emotions. And so,
Mhm.
what I find for women is that when we are addressing this subconscious piece, now her subconscious is like, oh, I can actually relax here. And when I say subconscious, I mean that our subconscious is this part of us that creates over 99% of our reality. And
Mhm.
so it's like this big memory bank where we store all of our memories from our entire life. And so we have memories in there from being a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old. right, in our prime developmental years. And
Mm-hmm.
we're creating beliefs about ourselves and the world around us, right? As a result of our upbringing. It doesn't always mean there's a big trauma. We all have these unconscious beliefs. And this is what tends to run the show in our adult lives as a result. And so oftentimes, I just had a session the other day with a woman, and she was telling me all this healing work she's done, but she can't seem to get over this barrier to the intimacy that she wants with her husband. And sure enough, we go and regress back in a hypnosis session and address this subconscious. And
Mm-hmm.
she was holding on to this piece around the way that she was raised. And she had a wonderful upbringing. But because she was so protected in that, now she formed beliefs that she can't do it on her own, that she needs this undercurrent of support
Yeah.
always. And so she overcompensated for that in her adult life, meaning now she was in complete control mode all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
of course she feels like she can't relax. And
Right.
so there was a part of her that needed to begin understanding in her adult life that she's allowed to relax, that she's allowed to experience peace, and that she can actually hold herself in any discomfort that is arising. And so it was about building her window of tolerance when
Mm-hmm.
it came to things like rejection, when it came to things that are inevitable when it comes to looking at our relationship to intimacy and sex and pleasure, right?
Right.
And then the third piece that I'm working with is obviously sexual. So what I mean by that is the actual anatomy, the skill sets of how to work with the body, how to touch, where to touch, how to communicate sexually, how to actually lead our pleasure um, inside of our own experience, our desires, what we want to have, these sorts of things. And so one element of that I work with is bridging the gap between spirituality and sexuality. And so when when I have couples or men or women, working with me, we get to a point where we can actually, and they've worked through these three stages, we get to a point where we can actually start to now use it for human consciousness. And so what I mean by that is creating a greater sense of connection with something that is bigger than us. So now we're taking these kind of pieces out of our own pain, out of our own discomfort, and kind of blowing it up in a way where we can now benefit others, benefit the world around us due to that deep connection we now have with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of teach them how to give back, not just to themselves, but that everything in part of their lives. Is that,
Yeah,
is that,
yeah, including their businesses. I
yeah.
mean, I have entrepreneurs who have taken what they have experienced in our work together and have applied it into building their businesses. Because intimacy is everywhere. It's not just happening in
Mhm.
the bedroom, right? If you want to build a successful business, you have to
Yeah,
know how to connect with people on a vulnerable level.
yeah.
If you really want to help, you have to let people see you. And so, a big part of this work is about feeling safe to be seen, to be experienced. And that is what brings a great sense of satisfaction to us, especially in business. We feel clear to go and create these opportunities to connect with people outside of our comfort bubble.
Mhm. And plus, from the sake of kiss and tell, that makes sense. You're kissing and telling. You're telling people
Yeah.
it's okay to do that. You're
Mhm.
reminding them that they have permission to be themselves. You're
Yes.
reminding them it's okay to feel pleasure. It's okay to connect to your partner. It's okay to be vulnerable, you know. I mean, at least that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear these concepts all the time now, right? Just be vulnerable, just allow yourself to be seen, just communicate effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but for someone that doesn't really feel safe staying in their bodies, that feels impossible. It feels extremely painful. And so the work that I do is about, again, looking at the pieces that are affecting our ability to do that, to be vulnerable, to really be seen. And it doesn't happen by pointing fingers at our partner or wanting them to change. It doesn't happen when we're looking outside of ourselves and, taking in information and not applying it. It really takes this support from someone who can see you better than you can see yourself.
Yeah.
And then we can actually start to apply what's necessary and catch those things in the moment when we're kind of deflecting, when we're reverting back to those patterns around intimacy and love, right?
So, yeah, and what you mean by reverting, correct me if I'm wrong, is when we don't get the result we're expecting the first time we're vulnerable or communicating
Yes.
effectively and we get shut down, so to speak. That's what you mean by reverting. You go back into your shell
Yeah.
and go, okay, I'll just go back to how I was. So,
Yeah, it's like there's a wall, right? And some
mhm,
people when they kind of change their energy, and I see this in couples, when I'm working with couples, I can see it happening in real time, which is great because I can actually point it out. But what I witness energetically is that they end up putting up this wall,
mhm,
that's very unconscious because what happens is they're starting to feel uncomfortable in their own bodies and their own emotions. And so, whatever pattern that they're having, they're going to revert back to that in that moment and deflect their ability to actually be seen. And so this is all happening within a few seconds. And when I see it happening, I say pause and I remind them, like, what are you actually experiencing in your body right now? Because I felt a shift in that energy. You were
mhm,
opening and then you hit a wall and you started to shrink back again. What's that about? Right?
mhm.
But when we're just there with our partners and we don't have someone to point those things out,
Right.
now we're just like reacting based off each other's reactions, and then it blows up and creates more conflict.
So, how do you advise them, like when they don't get the result they're hoping for, when they are vulnerable, or when they are trying to communicate? Because, yeah, yeah, I agree with you. The message
Yeah,
is out there, for us to communicate better, to be vulnerable,
yeah,
to allow intimacy, not just sex, but intimacy, with another person. Um, but to me, and I'll get your opinion on this, to me, it's, yeah, the information is coming at us,
hmm,
but it's not always a good follow through. It's like we talk about, this needs to happen, we need to start doing this would help your life.
yeah,
But then we don't really give them tools
hmm,
in that conversation. We say, do it. And then, okay, how do you do it?
yeah,
And how do you do it when it doesn't work the way you're telling me? You know what
yeah.
I mean? What do you
Yeah.
think?
So, a big thing that I tell my couples is to pause when they feel that shift and they know they're going back into this pattern. I
Mm-hmm.
tell them to pause. And so it's
Okay.
if the first step here is just bringing awareness to you as an individual when you feel yourself going back into that pattern, when you feel yourself shutting off or shutting down, or whatever that style that you have is, right? For
Mm-hmm.
some, especially for women, she might feel that she's kind of grasping onto his reaction. And so when that's happening, I ask them to acknowledge that themselves first
Mm-hmm.
And then if they can to pause the conversation there and come back when they feel like the emotional charge has kind of dissipated. And, I think that a big part of this conversation too, especially for couples, is recognizing that um, the way of conflict resolution is not linear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like this is a lifelong process. And so I also remind my couples some really hard truths, that number one, we can't read our partner's minds, and be prepared for each of you to be let down.
Right.
It's a normal part of the experience, to be let down. But if it's triggering something more than that, then that's where we want to look, right? Another piece of this is that we have to get really comfortable with rejection. And I see this a lot in men as well, especially around sex and intimacy. They often feel rejected by their partners and then they stop initiating sex. And then there's resentment that builds. It's like this age-old story, right? We hear this a million times. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, what do you actually do with that? And so the work that I do is I spend a lot of time with couples as individuals. And so I'm helping them build emotional resiliency, to build rejection tolerance, and to build a deep, unshakable bond with themselves. Because without that, they're gonna keep coming up with these conflicts and the patterns are gonna keep repeating themselves.
Right.
But when they have their own tools, their own practices, their own ability to be centered in their bodies and know where they end and another person begins, because a lot in couples, because we're so connected, because we're around this person a lot, it can feel like there's no separation. It's like we're living the same life and we're like basically the same people, but we have to also recognize to create healthy attachment or secure attachment, we have to also recognize where we end and the other person begins.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's this window of tolerance that I also have witnessed a lot with in my couples. And we have to be okay with understanding that both of our partners are on their own journey and it's not always going to match up perfectly. But if you are in deep love and respect and reverence for the person that you want to build a life with, you have to trust that they're going to catch up, that they are going to be invited into kind of meeting you there. But you also have to kind of hold the invitation instead of
Mm-hmm.
assuming that, again, your needs are not going to go met, you're holding on to resentment, and none of those things create magnetism between two people.
How many sessions do you normally have before you get to that aha moment, so to speak, for them?
We have aha moments from the very first session, but it depends on the couple's goals. So when I'm working with couples, it's about 6 months, I
Mm-hmm.
would say, where they're really finally getting to the point where they're recognizing the pattern, being able to shift it in the moment, and then coming back into resolution. And then from there, we get to then implement um, building upon the sexual experiences that they're having, right? Because if they're in conflict with one another, it's very hard to take things straight into the bedroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, for the most part, I'm working with couples individually around their own sexuality, their own beliefs around love and intimacy. They are taking on the tools, the practices, and then as that becomes applied into the relationship, now we're kind of bridging all of these kind of gaps and we get to then create the sexual relationship out of that. So it's a really beautiful process it can sometimes feel gradual, but throughout this whole time, they're having big breakthroughs, especially individually. Um, but I would say around 6 months. And that's a relatively short period of time when I have couples coming to me who have been in couples therapy or counseling for years.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean, it's a therapeutic process, but it's also it's also hitting upon these sexual components that are pleasurable. I mean, I'm like I said, sometimes when I'm guiding, sessions, especially my group sessions, like I have a women's group right now called La Vida Orgasmica, and they're learning how to become multi-orgasmic.
Mm,
And through that process, they're hands-on with themselves. They're doing these practices, they're doing the tantric meditations, they're learning about their energy system. And so it's not just about the physical, it's about bridging the physical, the energetic, the spiritual components, and understanding ourselves to a deeper degree that, traditional therapy doesn't go to. But
mm.
in 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 the work that I do, I mean, 90% of the people that are coming to me have tried everything.
But the three things that we do on the magazine are address as best as we can is sexual, mental, and physical health.
Hmm.
Because the three of them are combined. The
Yeah.
three of them influence each other.
Hmm.
Most people don't realize that. But what you're saying in the three things is sexual, mental, and physical health.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
saying it in a different verbiage.
Yeah. Doing this work, like even the other day when before I had a vaginal mapping session with the women inside of my group,
Mm-hmm.
I went and did my own practice. I went and explored the tissues of my own body in a way that was even a bit new for me. So it's something that I'm continuously developing. And then, from there creating or being able to apply that into a woman's reality
Mm-hmm.
based on what she's going through. It's not just about, okay, she's going to go in and touch her body in this way, but there's a whole story behind it. There's a theme of why she wants to experience herself in a new way. She wants to unlock new pleasure pathways. She wants to completely transform the way that she relates to pleasure and intimacy. And so I've had this lived experience um, also from living in two extremes. I used to be a big yogi and traveled a lot. I traveled through India, I traveled all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I was studying in India, it was a lot around um, detaching from the body, detaching from desires, detaching from pleasure. And I always question that because in the background of these teachings, I was still experiencing a ton of shame. I remember going from, practicing yoga all day, going back to my bedroom and self-pleasuring or having a desire to self-pleasure and feeling a ton of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was like messages that I picked up there, and I was like, something's not quite right here. Why is there such a big disconnect? This is supposed to be the most enlightening, transformative experience of my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
But it left me questioning more, and it left me with or it left me with more questions than answers. And so from there, speeding up, I mean, there was a gap of time between that, and then I became an erotic dancer. I was stripping on stage and having the time of my life, but I swung in the complete opposite direction,
Yeah.
right? And although that was liberating, I also realized in that sense I would go home after work at 6 a.m. and feel completely empty,
Mm-hmm.
feel a sense of dread, depression, and just numbness. And so I was like, okay, well, something's not quite right here, right? So it's
Right.
like, where's the middle ground? And so I've been able to live in both of these worlds and ended up really creating a nuanced bridge or an embodied lived experience between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really am so passionate about helping and supporting men and women to not just heal, but also to evolve their consciousness. Like pure energy that we're working with.
which is a reminder to everybody just because you know your body from a year ago doesn't mean it's the same reaction a year later. So you're always getting to know your body. So because it changes.
It changes, and as we take in information and go through our own
Mhm.
process, it's the I also I will also say a lot of the times I consult my pussy before making decisions. Because when I'm talking about that unadulterated,
Yeah.
pure potential, I mean, there's information there. It's like I think of it as this direct line of communication between our consciousness and our 3D reality.
Mhm.
And so when we can tune into that place, especially as women, I always say our intuition, our decision making lives there. It does not live in your stomach or wherever else we hear circulating, right?
All right.
It doesn't live there. It lives in your pelvis.
Thank you, Ava, for today.
Thank you so much.